During the late 70s and 80s, Pablo Escobar and his Medellín Cartel were responsible for over 80% of the world's supply of white powder. They went from supplying the US with 4 tons a year to 5 tons a day. And that was only possible thanks to the legendary trafficker Carlos Lehder, who would go on to completely revolutionize the trafficking industry. You might have seen Lehder portrayed on Netflix's Narcos series. However, what you might not know is that he was a much more important figure of the Medellín Cartel than shown in the series. But before we can understand the sheer influence of Lehder, we have to go back in time. Carlos Lehder's life before his association with Pablo Escobar was marked by a series of events that laid the groundwork for his later involvement in the drug trade. Born into a middle-class family in Armenia, Colombia, Lehder's early life was marked by poverty. And as he entered adulthood, he started looking for ways to escape it. After emigrating to New York at the age of 15, he started selling stolen cars and marijuana. Because of his lack of experience, he was quickly arrested and convicted of car theft. However, what he didn't know at the time was that this was a blessing in disguise. During his stay at Danbury Federal Prison, he made important connections in the criminal underworld. Here, he had the opportunity to learn from guys with real experience. He also met a very important man by the name of George Jung, who would become his future partner in crime. Jung had experience flying marijuana from Mexico to the US in a small aircraft. And when Lehder heard about that, he instantly knew what to do. After the pair got released, they bought a plane and started to fly white powder into the US via the Bahamas. However, in the mid-70s, the Lehder-Jung partnership started falling apart, and when it eventually did, Lehder was ready. He immediately began purchasing property on Norman's Cay, an island in the Bahamas. After threatening its residents to leave, Lehder effectively had his new headquarters for his operation. He had an airstrip, a fleet of planes and storage for tons and tons of kilos of product. At this point, Lehder started to look for a new partner, which was when the man himself came into the picture, Pablo Escobar. Lehder's association with Escobar and the Medellín Cartel proved to be a turning point in his criminal endeavors. Recognizing Lehder's ambition and business mind, Escobar welcomed him into the cartel, which at that time was mainly focused on marijuana smuggling. However, Lehder wanted to go a different route. He knew that with his distribution methods they could take over the whole trafficking world. And with his help, they devised a revolutionary plan to change the face of trafficking forever. One of Lehder's most significant contributions to the cartel was his idea to establish a major cocaine smuggling operation in the Bahamas. With the Bahamas being only a short distance away from Florida, the strategic location of Norman's Cay allowed the cartel to bypass traditional drug routes, where shipments could be easily intercepted by law enforcement. Lehder's innovation went beyond the location. He introduced the use of small aircraft such as single-engine planes and even Cessnas to fly massive quantities of cocaine directly into the United States. This new method allowed the cartel to transport significantly larger quantities of drugs compared to the earlier methods of smuggling. Under Lehder's direction, the Medellín Cartel's cocaine production and distribution network reached unprecedented levels. Let me just try to put it into perspective for you. Before Lehder joined the Medellín Cartel, they were supplying the United States with about 4 tons of powder every year. After he joined, that was ramped up to 5 tons a day. Lehder wasn't just some nobody as portrayed in Narcos. No, he was right up there with Pablo Escobar himself.
Lehder's name joins Pablo Escobar at the top of the DEA's list of most wanted Colombian cocaine traffickers.
The cartel's influence spread far and wide, amassing enormous wealth and power. Lehder's operations were so massive that he is often credited with coining the term "cocaine cowboy" to describe his audacious and extravagant lifestyle. He was bringing in more money than pretty much anyone alive at the time.
Carlos Lehder's secret cocaine base in the Bahamas has made him a multi-millionaire.
Norman's Cay was his playground, where he would host extravagant parties and just do whatever he liked. At his peak, it was estimated that Lehder and Escobar made $50 million a day. Lehder was worth around $3 billion at the time. Why not retire and quit the risky business of trafficking, you might ask? Well, Lehder was interested in more than just money. He was a crazy Nazi fanatic and idolized their leader. He wanted to become the Adolf Hitler of Latin America. He founded the National Latin Movement and quickly gained supporters.
What he wants now is political power in Colombia. Lehder sets up a Nazi-inspired party called the National Latin American Movement.
After the US started pressing Colombia to sign an extradition treaty, Lehder offered to pay Colombia's national debt along with Escobar. Unfortunately, this didn't work. And after years of partying and living the life of a true king, Lehder started getting lazy. He was focusing more on politics and less on his trafficking empire. He was partying way too much and wasn't as sharp as he used to be. This proved to be very bad timing as law enforcement agencies intensified their efforts to bring down the leaders of the Medellín Cartel. The crackdown on the narco barons happened after the assassination of Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. He was murdered because of his efforts to try to bring the Medellín Cartel down to its knees. Killing criminals is one thing. However, assassinating high-profile officials is a totally another thing. And because of this, the leaders of the cartel would be met with resistance that they had never felt before. They were losing shipments in the hundreds of tons, both in Colombia and in the US. In 1987, this culminated when Lehder was captured in Colombia during a joint operation by Colombian and American authorities. Subsequently, he was extradited to the United States to face a string of drug trafficking charges. In 1988, Carlos Lehder was convicted on several counts of drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole plus 135 years. He was released on parole in 2020.